My name is Nicolas Cary. I'm the co-founder of a company called Blockchain. Over the past 12 months, I've traveled about 380,000 miles around the world. I have been to fintech conferences and developer conferences, speaking with government agencies and regulators all over the world to talk about fintech, and specifically to talk about a phenomenon known as Bitcoin and blockchain. So it's kind of hard to have a conversation about fintech and not discuss this. So I'm hopeful today to kind of share some of the stories that I've seen around the world. I'm not here to talk about what my company does so much, more to talk about why we can really do some amazing things with digital currency. And so my hope today is to share some of those stories. I'll be open to answering any questions about what it's like running a company in this space. We've raised a lot of money to basically bring our services around the world. We do everything essentially for free. We open source almost all of our software. We do make money. We have a lot of people visiting our web properties, so we sell partnerships and advertising. We don't charge our users for anything. So let's talk a little bit about what we're witnessing in the world. My company is called Blockchain. We have about 4 million users. We had about 80,000 users a week. We're one of the fastest growing technology companies in the world, not just in fintech. So what if you can imagine a world with completely frictionless payments? A world where you could send value from a fly fishing lodge in South America instantly across all the oceans and continents to Singapore basically for free. No Forex fees, nothing in between, no middlemen, no merchant processors, and thankfully no banks. So what about if you had a payments platform that had zero barriers to entry, a world where users came first? That's kind of what we're working on. So it's relevant to spend a little time talking about what Bitcoin is and what Bitcoin is not, because it's vastly misunderstood. I think the #1 question I typically answer is Bitcoin illegal? And it is not illegal. So just like email isn't illegal, and talking out loud isn't illegal, and maybe shopping in a library is probably less preferred, but Bitcoin is not illegal. It is 3 things that are very important to understand. It's a technology, it's a computer protocol, just like ones you guys use every single day in your lives, and it's also a gigantic network of computers all over the world that keep a copy of something called the blockchain. This is a vastly misunderstood concept, but basically the blockchain is a big spreadsheet in the sky, and there are thousands and thousands of copies of it that are always current. They're always in the exact same condition. And that's really important, and I'll explain it in a minute. So if you wanted to have a global payments network like Amex, Visa, or PayPal, but you wanted it to be far more affordable, you need to have a couple things happen. You would need to have a currency to use on this network. So we've tried all kinds of different currencies as human beings. We've tried pearls and coins and tokens and cash, gold and other things. And as we move into the digital age, it's probably appropriate we think about making digital money. If you want a payment network, you really have to have a trusted ledger to record transactions, so that if I send Z some money, there's a place to go make sure that that really happened. And lastly, you have to have settlement with a high degree of certainty, so that if I send money to somebody, it can't be double spent. Well, for a long time, we had to build a human blockchain. We had to have all these people in between each other to make a transaction happen. We had to have an accountant and a person do compliance and a banker and someone to take cash at the teller. So you had all these people kind of checking each other's work because we really couldn't trust each other. Well, now there's a technical solution to this, and it's a really big deal. It's called the blockchain. Basically, there are copies of this spreadsheet in the sky run by volunteers all over the world. To give you some context, this is the world's largest distributed computing project on Earth. It's more powerful than all the other supercomputers in the world combined. So right now, if the Visa processing center in Luxembourg gets hit by a comet, basically all of the transactions moving through Europe will cease to a halt. But if one of the nodes in the Bitcoin network gets corrupted, or power gets ceased, or something bad happens to it, all the other nodes just ignore it, and it can continue to process payments like nothing else happened. So it's a very robust architecture for a security network. So what Bitcoin isn't, Bitcoin is not a company, it's not centrally controlled, it's not proprietary, there's no IP on the technology layer itself. And it's not necessarily bound to jurisdictions in a conventional sense. It is a global payments platform. So if you've never seen a Bitcoin transaction, this is kind of what it looks like. And if you wait till after all of this, I will set you up with a wallet, and I will send you some Bitcoins. This is my get-rich-quick plan. I give all my money away. But some of you might owe me some favors someday, because I used to do this with a bunch of my friends back in 2011, when Bitcoins were worth less than a few cents. And now they all have a bunch of Bitcoins, and some of them have paid off their student debt and other things. And that's because Bitcoin over the last couple of years has increased in value quite a bit because the addressable market for having a global transaction network is in the trillions. So just like if I wanted to send someone in this room an email, I would need to know their email address. In Bitcoin, it's the same thing. You can share a Bitcoin address with anybody in the world, and then anyone in the world can send you some Bitcoin. When you do that, it gets broadcasted to something called the blockchain. So people are talking about blockchain all around London. At Level 39 today, Canary Wharf, at the Bank of England, there are steering committees and groups, there are incubators, and everyone is talking about this thing. They don't really know what it is, they just think it's pretty interesting and it has a lot of money flowing through it, and they all want in. What this is a big database that can't be changed once you send value from one place to another. It's called an immutable database, and this is a really big deal because you can't change anything that's happened there. So you can't corrupt someone, you can't put a gun to somebody's head and tell them to alter what's happened in the database. So every single day, more and more transactions are moving across this network, and they're happening between people, just like Skype allowed people to send voice calls to each other, and everyone in the telecom industry flipped shit. Well, Bitcoin allows everybody to send value to each other in a similar way, using peer-to-peer technology. So I won't spend a lot of time on the history, but it is pretty interesting, and it's fit for a Hollywood movie, and there'll be many of them, and they're already in the pipeline. But basically, the project was invented in 2008 by some kind of developer or a group of programmers that used the pseudonym. They launched a network, some basic marketplaces were formed, some angel investments were placed in 2011. Merchants all over the world started to accept Bitcoin. Mom and pop shops taking forms of payment essentially without having to pay fees. This is a big deal. Every time you accept a form of payment from a credit card company, there's a base fee and then a 2 to 3% transaction fee, not to mention the cost of fraud, which always fall on the merchants. So if you can eliminate that, it's just like taking a cash transaction. So merchants were really excited about Bitcoin. And last year, a whole bunch of very famous merchants started to accept Bitcoin. A few companies you might have heard of, like OkCupid, WordPress, Wikipedia, Overstock, Microsoft, Dell, and many, many others. These companies represent hundreds of billions of dollars of market capitalization. They do not do things without their due diligence. They're doing things because they're innovative. So, what are we talking about? It's kind of hard to talk about Bitcoin without discussing the economics of it, and some very thoughtful people will probably be debating this for a long time. But basically, Bitcoins as a currency are released predictably. This is very different than the currencies you and I are used to dealing with, where every single year more and more money gets printed or managed by central banks, and it changes quite a bit. So we're kind of at the whim of politicians, and unpredictability is usually not a good thing for markets. This is why everyone speculates on what the Fed and the Bank of England and everyone else is going to do. Essentially, we know exactly how many Bitcoins will be released. There'll be 21 million of them at some point. But don't worry, that number is divisible by up to 8 decimal points, so there's trillions and trillions of units in the event that this becomes wildly successful. What's important is, though, it's entirely secured by cryptography, so it's run by mathematics and not by people. So, let's just take ourselves out of the context of this room for a minute. Imagine you're laying in a field and you're a caveman with a lot of technology at your fingertips, and you kind of want to think about what you could invent as a better form of money. Well, human beings have invented all kinds of things to better our world and make our lives better in general. So we invented wheels so we could travel around, we paved roads so we could travel more freely, we invented tractors to do things more efficiently. So why can't we invent a better form of money? Well, let's think about that. What kind of properties would you want your money to have? So you'd probably want your money to be able to be spent and sent anywhere in the world. It would need to be fungible. It would need to be easily divisible. You would want to be able to transact with anyone in the world instantly, basically for free. It'd need to be highly counterfeit proof, so you couldn't be able to copy it and Xerox it, which is a major problem for cash currencies today. And you'd want it to be durable. If you throw it in water or burn it or something like that, it shouldn't be able to get destroyed. And the last and most controversial aspect of this is maybe you would want your currency based on something called scarcity. So unlike the currencies we're used to today, which just get created and inflated constantly, Bitcoin has scarcity designed into it on purpose. And this will probably be the most controversial aspect of it as a currency project. But again, I think it'll be debated for a long time. There's a good reason for the scarcity, though. It's why we don't use grains of sand for currency, because there's an unlimited amount of them. We trust that things are scarce or precious, and Bitcoin has that in its design. So even though I may sound like a crazy person from the future, a lot has changed over the last few years. So the Bitcoin network launched right back here, and just a few people like cryptographers and computer scientists were using it for fun and just sort of exploring with it. But I think the overall trend line is really what to acknowledge here, which is the number of transactions despite the volatility in the price. have grown. And right now, the total market cap of Bitcoin is about $4 billion, so this is still a relatively small experiment in the context of global finance. So what is it? It's a scarce digital commodity. It's borderless and frictionless, and it's purely digital. And it's a payment network with zero counterparty risk, which means I can make a payment and no one can steal it in between me and the person receiving it, and it can't be reversed. So what are we talking about? Well, there's $7.7 trillion in credit card fees every year. In the United States, 20.1% of US households are underbanked. I was in Bryant Park, which is a little bit like Canary Wharf in London. It's one of the wealthiest areas in Manhattan. And I was there with a venture capitalist recently, and we were watching these kids throw quarters into the pond in the middle of the park. But right behind them was a homeless person picking up those coins. So while kids were making wishes, someone else was taking the money. And I think it just was a really stark juxtaposition to me, which is that even in one of the wealthiest places in the world, we don't have it right. And as was mentioned earlier, there's between 2 and 2.5 billion people that don't have access to financial services whatsoever. And a lot of people are working on this problem, and I think there'll be a lot of interesting solutions. So whether you come from the first world or the third, or whether you're two parents of some young Thai kids, and I should mention that all the photography in this presentation was taken over last year while I was traveling around. I think Bitcoin represents a super interesting opportunity to discuss inclusion, financial inclusion. Doesn't care what color your skin is or where you were born, just like you can sign up for an email address anywhere in the world. You can sign up and essentially replace a bank with 10,000 lines of open source software on your phone. So if you can't kind of capture how huge that is, wait a little bit and I'll set you up and you'll see what I'm talking about. But let's observe some general patterns. I'm into photography, that's why I take all those photos, and a long time ago I used to have to get my photography developed. No one who's born on Earth is going to know what that means anymore, because they take a picture and they broadcast it to their 10,000 friends on Instagram, and they get all kinds of exciting people to share it. And now Kodak is dead, and Apple crushed them. Same thing with Blockbuster. I used to drive down the street in my car burning dead dinosaurs to go hope that the VHS that had just come out was available. But now I can get almost any movie I want digitally, instantly, basically for free. Same thing with cards. I've been a little neglectful to my family and mother, and sometimes that brings some wrath my way, but now I can get a reminder and send her a postcard or an email in this case to let her know that I'm thinking about her on her birthday. So, this photo was taken in Morocco. It's best not to have your head stuck in the sand on this issue, which is why there's so much attention on this specific topic. I think the digital world is part of our DNA now. It's impacting every aspect of our lives, from how we share digital content to how we eat our movies and watch television, not eat our movies, but eat digital content, and how we share our time with our loved ones, whether that's on Skype or Google Hangouts or other things. So why can't our money be digital too? So I want to talk a little bit more about some of these things. It's happening in every aspect of our lives, and so let's not ignore it. And I'm going to run out of time. So basically, this is a really cool story that I'll share quickly. One of my friends was born in Iran. She does not have proof of citizenship, so she essentially has no paperwork. And she eventually was able to return home to Afghanistan after the conflicts, and luckily got out to go pursue a PhD in Germany. And she's returned to Afghanistan to start a company and a group basically that's helping do education in Afghanistan, but they can't get any funding in the country. PayPal won't touch them, the banks won't wire any funds, and Western Union charges 50%. So essentially, she's had to move all of her operations to use a new type of virtual payment system so that she can get money into the hands of the volunteers that support the kids in the schools that she works in. That would be impossible with any other payment network. So you'll hear a lot of weird news about Bitcoin. A lot of it will focus on speculation and greed, and I kind of see things in a completely different light, in a totally different context. So last 2 years, my sister was in the Peace Corps in Morocco, which is kind of a volunteer program that North America has. And we met this guy. This was a Berber guide who took us out into the desert. Hadn't seen anything that even remotely looked like civilization for like 3 or 4 days. And we were watching a sunset over the dunes, and the dung beetles were out in the desert. And I remember that the whole moment was completely ruined when this guy pulled out an iPhone 5 out of his blue gelato and answered a phone call in the desert. And I was just, my mind was blown. Like, that guy sells geodes for a living, right? But now in his pocket, he has access to a financial system that puts him essentially in a more competitive position than the Fortune 500 traders and the people over in Canary Wharf. And that was kind of an important moment for me. So all over the world, people are using Bitcoin. This was a transaction that happened at a bar in Santiago, Chile. You've got an American football game, a football pitch, and the Bitcoin blockchain on the right as CNN is filming the first transaction at a nightclub. This is Christine. She keeps the students at La Sorbonne over-caffeinated. She has a famous sign on her coffee shop that says, "I do not accept credit cards. Bitcoin, preferred cash only." This one is a club. There are now 300 chapters of the College Crypto Network around the world. Students all over the place are incorporating digital currency systems into their school campuses. They really get this. And so while we may not convince my grandmother to accept Bitcoin, I think we'll be able to get a lot of other people on board. This guy is really special. He's from Bristol, lives in Bristol. His name's Francesco. His wife is Francesca. He was a flight attendant, she was a hairdresser, and they saved all their money and opened a deli, and they import a lot of expensive goods from Italy. But what they're doing now is accepting Bitcoin, paying their suppliers in Bitcoin. No one is selling the coins themselves. It's all in the network, so they're not paying any fees, which is kind of exciting. So the last story I'll tell is about these kids. This was at a big event called Money 2020 in Las Vegas, so the world leading financial luminaries get together and hang out in Las Vegas and talk about what's happening. And we hosted a hackathon, and so all of these different major payment providers like PayPal and MasterCard and others were there. And about 60% of the developers chose to essentially kind of forego their prizes that they would otherwise have gotten and decided to work on Bitcoin projects. So where the developers are going is kind of like an early indicator for where you should be spending your time. But anyway, these two kids on the left, not me but the other ones, created a project that immediately eliminated the volatility in Bitcoin with a blockchain wallet. Essentially, in the background, they were buying gold and buying cash and locking the value of someone's currency so that tomorrow, no matter what happened in the price of Bitcoin, they would have a fixed value. They did that in 20 hours of computer hacking, and that was a major criticism of Bitcoin in 2014, was that the price was moving a lot. And I think it's an interesting criticism. It's a valid one. The stock market in China dropped 40% this summer. Like, that lost trillions of dollars. Bitcoin is still small and it gets a huge amount of attention. But anyway, these kids in 20 hours figured out how to do it, figured out how to get rid of the volatility in the price of Bitcoin, and so they got a big prize for that. And there's another hackathon happening this year. It's bigger and there are more prizes than ever for it. So the interesting thing about Bitcoin is that it lets you be your own bank. And so that opens up a world of possibilities. So anyway, we're here to talk about FinTech for good. I think the key takeaways are this is an open payments network. Just like TCP/IP has allowed computer networks around the world to send messages to each other, we now have an open payment network that allows people to transact with each other. Payments and value transfer is sort of the first application of this. There will be many others, from land title registry to the ability to prove that you've created a document, to be able to prove that you started working on a song or some other things. And a lot of companies are working on this. It's a really exciting space, and it's attracted nearly $1 billion of venture capital over the past few years. It is the highest growth tech sector for venture capital in the world. And there's a good reason for that, because we can kind of reinvent how everything has ever been thought of with value transfer. So anyway, I'm very grateful to be invited here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for letting me charge my phone. That was very appreciated.